Some betrayals cut so deep that they reshape your entire understanding of love, family, and what it means to fight for the people you cherish most. What happens when the very person who raised the man you married decides you're not worthy of the life you've built together? When accusations become weapons and love becomes a battlefield, sometimes the only way to win is to give them exactly what they think they want. Hit like and subscribe if you've ever been underestimated by your own family, because this story will show you what happens when quiet strength meets calculated revenge. My name is Maya Brooks. I am 32 years old, and I live in the rolling hills of Sonoma County, California, where the morning mist clings to vineyard rows like secrets waiting to be revealed. For the past 7 years, I've called this place home, but I've never felt more like a stranger than I do today. Standing in my own kitchen, staring at the suitcase my husband has just placed on our marble countertop. The irony isn't lost on me that I'm surrounded by the very things that once made me feel so accomplished. The farmhouse kitchen I designed myself, with its reclaimed wood beams and hand-selected ceramic tiles. The garden visible through our picture window, where I've cultivated heirloom tomatoes and climbing roses with the same patience I once thought I was building my marriage with. Everything here bears my fingerprints, my vision, my heart. But apparently, none of that matters when your mother-in-law decides you're the villain in her carefully constructed narrative. Celeste, you have to understand, my husband Adrian says, his voice carrying that particular tone of exhaustion that's become his default whenever his mother enters our conversations. She's been through so much since Dad died. The grief, the loneliness. She just wants to feel close to family again. Watch him fidget with his wedding ring, the simple platinum band I chose because it reminded me of his quiet strength. He's 34 now, though the stress lines around his eyes make him look older. When I first met him 8 years ago at a wine tasting in Napa, he had this confident way of moving through the world, like someone who knew exactly where he belonged. Now he seems to fold in on himself whenever his mother's name comes up. Close to family, I repeat, tasting the words like a wine that's turned to vinegar. Is that what we're calling it? The suitcase sits between us like an accusation. Black leather, expensive, with Adrian's initials monogrammed on the side. It was a gift from his mother last Christmas, along with a pointed comment about how quality luggage is so important for a man who travels as much as you do, Adrian. She'd looked directly at me when she said it, as if my presence in his life was somehow limiting his mobility. Margaret Whitmore has never liked me, but until 6 months ago, she'd at least maintained the pretense of civility. The mask came off gradually, then all at once. Like a slow leak that suddenly becomes a flood. It started with small comments about my cooking, my decorating choices, my career as a freelance graphic designer. "Oh, how nice that you work from home," she'd say, the words dripping with condescension. Adrian always said he wanted a wife who could focus on making a real home. The thing about passive aggression is that it's designed to make you question your own perceptions. Am I being too sensitive? Did she really mean it that way? Maybe I'm imagining the deliberate slight, the calculated dismissal. But when someone consistently makes you feel small in your own home, pattern recognition becomes survival. The turning point came 3 weeks ago. During what was supposed to be a pleasant family dinner, Margaret had been staying with us for a long weekend, ostensibly to help plan a surprise birthday party for Adrian's aunt. I'd gone out of my way to make her comfortable, changing our sheets to the thread count she preferred, stocking the guest bathroom with her favorite imported soap, even researching restaurants that served the specific type of cuisine she'd mentioned loving. None of it mattered, you know, Adrian, she said over dessert. A lemon tart I'd spent 3 hours perfecting. I was talking to Sandra from the country club, and she mentioned that her daughter Rebecca is getting divorced. Such a shame, really. She's got a master's degree from Stanford, and comes from such a good family. I always thought you two would make a lovely couple." The comment hung in the air like smoke. Adrian shifted uncomfortably, mumbling something about being happily married, but he didn't look at me when he said it. That's when I knew Margaret's campaign wasn't just about disliking me. It was about replacement. "Rebecca has such excellent taste," Margaret continued, as if Adrian hadn't spoken. "She redecorated her mother's entire house last year. Professional level work, of course. She has the education for it. Not like these online certificate programs anyone can take nowadays," I felt. My cheeks burn. I'd never mentioned taking any online courses, but Margaret had clearly done her research. She knew exactly which credentials I lacked, which vulnerabilities to exploit. "Celeste has built a very successful design business," Adrian said, finally meeting my eyes. "Her work speaks for itself." "Oh, of course, dear. I'm sure it's perfectly adequate for what it is." Adequate. The word lodged itself in my chest like a splinter. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part came later, when I overheard Margaret on the phone with someone, her voice carrying through the thin walls of our guest room. "She's got him completely fooled," she was saying. "Sweet little Maya with her big brown eyes and her artistic pretensions. He doesn't see how she's isolated him from his real family. How she's made him financially dependent on her little hobby business. Mark my words, she have him in couples therapy next. Filling his head with nonsense about emotional boundaries and healthy communication." I stood frozen in the hallway, my hand gripping the doorframe so hard my knuckles went white. The casual cruelty of it. The way she spoke about my love for her, son like it was some kind of con game, made my stomach churn. But what devastated me most was the realization that she'd been studying me, cataloguing my weaknesses, preparing her attack with military precision. "She's stolen my son," Margaret continued, her voice taking on a theatrical quality that suggested she was enjoying the drama. "Turned him against his own mother, I've seen. It happened to other families. These girls come from nothing, and they see a good man from a good family as their ticket to a better life. But I won't let her destroy everything we've built." The conversation replayed in my mind for days afterward. Every interaction with Adrian became filtered through his mother's poisonous interpretation. When I suggested we stay in for a quiet evening instead of driving to his cousin's barbecue, was I isolating him? When I mentioned that my design business was having a particularly good month, was I making him feel financially inadequate? The self-doubt crept in like fog, distorting everything I thought I knew about my own motivations. But the final blow came yesterday, when Margaret called Adrian while he was at work, and I happened to answer his phone. He'd left it on the kitchen counter while he showered, and when I saw her name on the screen, some instinct made me pick up. "Oh," she said, her voice dripping with false surprise. "I was hoping to speak with Adrian." "He's in the shower," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "Can I take a message?" There was a pause, and then Margaret's voice took on that particular quality it got when she was about to deliver what she considered a devastating blow. "Actually, Maya, I think it's time you and I had an honest conversation." Something in her tone made me sink into one of our kitchen chairs. "About what?" "About what's best for Adrian. About what's best for this family." The word family hit me like a physical blow. In Margaret's world, family was a fortress, and I was forever on the outside looking in. "I don't know what you mean," I said though. We both knew that was a lie. "I think you do. I think you know exactly what you've done to my son. How you've changed him, isolated him, made him dependent on you in ways that aren't healthy for a grown man." My hands were shaking now, but I kept my voice steady. "Adrian is a grown man who makes his own choices. Is he? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like he's been making choices based on what will keep you happy, not what will make him happy. He used to call me every week. Now I'm lucky if I hear from him twice a month. He used to love spending holidays with the extended family. Now suddenly he's too busy, too tired, too whatever excuse you've given him. The accusations came faster now, like she'd been storing them up for months. You've turned him against his own mother. Maya, you've made him choose between his family and his marriage. And that's not fair to him. It's not fair to any of us. That's not true, I said, but my voice sounded weak even to my own ears, isn't it? When was the last time Adrian came to visit me alone? When was the last time he made a decision about our family without checking with you first? You've got him trained like a dog, and you don't even see it. The line went quiet for a moment, and I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. I know what you are, Maya. I know what you've done, and I won't stand by and watch you destroy my son's life any longer. She hung up before I could respond, leaving me alone in my beautiful kitchen, surrounded by the life I'd built with Adrian, wondering if everything I thought I knew about our marriage was a lie. When Adrian came home that evening, he found me sitting at our dining table, staring at the place settings I'd laid out for a dinner I'd never cooked. He took one look at my face and knew something was wrong. What happened? He asked, settling into the chair across from me. I told him about the phone call, about his mother's accusations, about the conversation I'd overheard 3 weeks ago. I watched his face go through a series of emotions: surprise, anger, sadness, and finally, something that looked like resignation. She's been saying things like that for months, he admitted. I kept hoping she'd come around, that she'd see how happy we are together. But she's convinced herself that you're the problem, that our marriage is somehow a threat to her relationship with me. Is it? I asked, the question I'd been afraid to voice finally escaping. Have I changed you? Have I isolated you from your family? Adrian reached across the table and took my hands in his. You've changed me, he said quietly. You've made me happier, more confident, more myself than I've ever been. But Mom sees change as loss, and she can't understand that growing up doesn't mean growing away. She wants you to leave me. I know. She thinks I'm not good enough for you. I know. She's never going to accept me, is she? Adrian was quiet for a long moment. I don't think so. I think she's decided that anyone I marry is going to be a threat to her place in my life, and she's going to fight that until the day she dies. That night, I lay awake listening to Adrian's, breathing, thinking about Margaret's words, about the way she'd said, I know what you are, with such certainty. What was I, in her eyes? A manipulator? A woman who had stolen her son's love and loyalty through some kind of feminine trickery. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. Not just at Margaret, but at the entire situation, at the way I'd been made to feel defensive about loving her son, at the way I'd started second-guessing my own motivations, my own worth, my own place in the family I'd tried so hard to join. By morning, I had a plan. When Adrian left for work, I called Margaret. I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday, I said when she answered. Have you? Her voice was smug, like she'd been expecting this call. I have. And I think you're right. The silence on the other end was telling. She'd been prepared for me to fight back, to defend myself, to make emotional appeals about love and family. She hadn't expected capitulation. Right about what, exactly? She asked carefully. About Adrian. About what's best for him. About what I've taken from him. Go on. I think you're right that he's been making choices based on what I want instead of what he wants. I think you're right that I've come between him and his family. I think you're right that he'd be happier without me. I could practically hear her mind racing, trying to figure out if this was some kind of trap. Are you saying you're going to leave him? I'm saying I'm going to give him a choice. A real choice, without any pressure from me. What kind of choice? The kind where he can choose his family over his marriage without having to feel guilty about it. There was a long pause. What exactly are you proposing? I'm proposing that we find out who Adrian really chooses when he's not worried about hurting anyone's feelings. I'm proposing that we discover what he really wants when he's not trying to balance his mother's needs against his wife's needs. And how do we do that? By removing me from the equation entirely. I could hear Margaret's breath catch. You're going to leave him. I'm going to give him back to you. Completely, no strings attached, no guilt trips, no emotional manipulation, just a clean break that lets him rediscover who he is without me influencing his decisions. For how long? For as long as it takes. Maybe a week, maybe a month, maybe forever. It'll be up to him. Margaret was quiet for so long I thought she might have hung up. Finally, she spoke. What's the catch? No catch, just one condition. If he chooses to come back to me, if he decides that our marriage is what he wants, then you accept that choice. No more campaigns. No more passive-aggressive comments. No more attempts to undermine our relationship. You respect his decision, and you respect me as his wife. And if he doesn't come back, then you were right all along, and I'll disappear from his life permanently. Another long pause. I could picture Margaret in her pristine living room, surrounded by family photos that conspicuously featured very few pictures of Adrian and me. Together, trying to figure out if this was the victory she'd been working toward, or some kind of elaborate trap. When? She asked finally. Today I'll pack his bags and send him to you today. He can stay at your house, spend time with the family. Remember what his life was like before he met me. No pressure, no timeline, no expectations. Just space to figure out what he really wants. What will you tell him? The truth. That I love him too much to keep him in a marriage that makes him choose between his wife and his mother. That I want him to be happy, even if that happiness doesn't include me. I hung up before she could respond, my hands shaking with the magnitude of what I'd just committed to. But for the first time in months, I felt something like peace. The constant tension, the walking on eggshells, the exhausting emotional labor of trying to prove my worth to someone who had already decided I was worthless. It was all about to end. One way or another, Adrian came home to find his suitcase packed and waiting in the kitchen. I'd folded his clothes carefully, the way he liked them, and included all his favorite toiletries, his reading glasses, the book he'd been working his way through. I'd even packed a framed photo of us from our honeymoon, though I wasn't sure he'd want it where he was going. What's this? He asked, though his tone suggested he already knew. I called your mother today, I said, keeping my voice calm and steady. We had a long conversation about what's best for you. Adrian's face went pale. Celeste, whatever she said you'd be happier without me. She said I've stolen you from your family, that I've made you choose between your wife and your mother. She said I've changed you in ways that aren't healthy. That's not true, isn't it? When was the last time you visited your mother alone? When was the last time you made a decision about your family without considering how I'd feel about it? Adrian opened his mouth to argue, then closed it again. We both knew Margaret hadn't been entirely wrong. She's manipulating you, he said finally. She's playing games, trying to break us up. Maybe, but she's also your mother and she loves you. Maybe not the way I love you, but she does love you. And maybe she sees something I don't. Maybe she sees that you've been sacrificing pieces of yourself to keep me happy. That's not Adrian. I stepped closer to him, close enough to touch his face, to memorize the way his eyes looked when he was confused and hurt and trying to be strong. I need you to go stay with your mother for a while. No, I need you to remember who you were before you met me. I need you to spend time with your family, to reconnect with the parts of your life that I've never been part of. Maya, you're scaring me. I'm setting you free. The words hung between us like a bridge I was about to burn. Adrian stared at me, his face cycling through disbelief, anger, and something that might have been relief. For how long? He asked quietly. For as long as it takes. Takes for what? For you to figure out what you really want, not what you think. You should want, not what will make me happy or make your mother happy, but what will make you happy. Adrian picked up the suitcase, testing its weight. If I decide I want to come home, then you come home. And if I decide I don't, I felt something crack in my chest, but I kept my voice steady. Then you don't. He kissed me then, soft and desperate and full of all the things we weren't saying. When he pulled away, his eyes were wet. I love you, he said. I know, and I love you too. That's why I'm doing this. I watched him walk to his car, put the suitcase in the trunk, and drive away. Then I went inside, poured myself a glass of wine, and called my sister. I just sent my husband to his mother's house. I told her without preamble. What? Why? Because she accused me of stealing her son, so I gave him back. The first few days were the hardest. The house felt too quiet, too empty, like a stage set waiting for actors who might never return. I threw myself into work, taking on new projects, responding to client emails at all hours. Anything to keep my mind from dwelling on what Adrian might be doing, what he might be thinking, what he might be deciding. Margaret called on day 3. He's miserable, she said without preamble. Good evening to you too, Margaret. He sits in his old room staring at that photo of you too. He barely eats. He won't talk to anyone. This isn't what I wanted, isn't it? I wanted him to remember his family, to remember who he was before he fell in love with me. Margaret was quiet for a moment. He's not the same person he was before he met you. No, he's not. He's better. He's more confident, more comfortable with himself, more willing to stand up for what he believes in. But you see those changes as losses instead of gains. He used to need me. And there it was. The truth underneath all the accusations and manipulations and passive-aggressive comments. Margaret wasn't afraid I'd stolen her son. She was afraid he'd grown up. He still needs you, I said quietly, just not in the same way. He needs you more. Different isn't more. Different is just different. I could hear her crying now, soft. Sounds that she was trying to muffle. I miss him. I miss the boy he used to be. I know, but Margaret, he's not a boy anymore. He's a man who chose to build a life with me, and you can either be part of that life, or you can keep fighting it. But you can't change it. What if I can't do this? What if I can't share him? Then you'll lose him completely, not to me, but to your own inability to let him grow up. The line went quiet for a long moment. How do I fix this? She asked finally. You start by accepting that loving someone sometimes means letting them go. You start by trusting that the son you raised is capable of making good decisions about his own life. You start by treating me like a person instead of a threat. And if I can't, then Adrian will have to choose. And I think we both know what choice he'll make. She hung up without saying goodbye. But something in her voice had changed. The fight had gone out of her, replaced by something that sounded almost like understanding. Adrian came home on day 7. I was in the garden, tending to my roses. When I heard his car in the driveway, he found me there, still wearing my gardening gloves, dirt under my fingernails, probably looking nothing like the polished woman his mother thought he deserved. Hi, he said. Hi. He sat down on the stone bench we'd installed last spring, the one that faced the view of the rolling hills beyond our property. I had a lot of time to think. And I realized that my mother was right about one thing. I have changed since I met you. I've become more myself, more confident, more willing to stand up for what I believe in. But she was wrong about why that's a bad thing. I pulled off my gloves and sat beside him. What did you tell her? I told her that I love her, that I'll always love her, but that I'm not her little boy anymore. I told her that I chose to marry you, that I choose to stay married to you, and that if she wants to be part of my life, she needs to accept that choice. How did she take it? Better than I expected. I think your conversation with her helped. She said some things about learning to let go, about trying to see you as a person instead of a rival. And you? How are you? Adrian reached for my hand, intertwining our fingers. I'm grateful that you loved me enough to let me go. Grateful that you trusted me enough to make my own choice. Grateful that you fought for our marriage by refusing to fight for it. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. I know, but it was also the bravest thing you've ever done. We sat there in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the hills, both of us probably thinking about the week we'd just survived. And the future we were choosing to build together. What happens now? I asked. Now we figure out how to be a family that includes my mother without sacrificing our marriage. Now we set boundaries that protect what we've built without punishing her for loving me. Now we prove that love isn't a zero-sum game. And if she can't do it, if she can't accept me, then she lose me entirely, because I won't spend my life choosing between the woman who raised me and the woman I want to grow old with. I won't live in a world where loving you means hurting her, or loving her means hurting you. 3 months later, Margaret came to dinner. She brought flowers from her garden, complimented my cooking, and asked genuine questions about my work. It wasn't perfect, there were still moments of tension, still carefully navigated conversations, still the occasional passive-aggressive comment, but it was progress. This is beautiful, she said, looking around our dining room with something that might have been approval. You've made a lovely home. Thank you, I said, and meant it. Adrian tells me you designed everything yourself. I did. It was important to me that our home reflect who we are as a couple. Margaret nodded thoughtfully. I can see that. It's very you both. Later, as we were clearing the dishes, she pulled me aside. I owe you an apology, she said quietly. I was wrong about you, about what you wanted, about what you were doing to Adrian. I was so afraid of losing him that I almost lost him anyway. You weren't entirely wrong, I said. I did change him. Love changes people, but change isn't always loss. No, it isn't. Sometimes it's growth. We stood there in my kitchen, 2 women who had fought over the same man's heart, finally understanding that love expands to fill the space it's given, that there was room for both of us in Adrian's life, as long as we weren't trying to eliminate each other. I'll never be the daughter-in-law you imagined, I said. No, Margaret agreed. You're better. You're the daughter-in-law Adrian chose. 6 months later, I launched a new project through my design business. I called it Revenge Treats, a service that helped people redesign their spaces after major life transitions. Divorce, death, job, loss, family drama, all the moments when people needed to reclaim their environments and make them feel like home again. My first client was a woman whose mother-in-law had spent years criticizing her decorating choices. Together, we created a space that was unapologetically hers, full of color and personality and joy. When she sent me photos of her family's reaction to the transformation, I saw something I recognized in her face. The quiet satisfaction of someone who had finally stopped apologizing for taking up space. Sometimes revenge isn't about destroying your enemies. Sometimes it's about refusing to let them destroy you. Sometimes it's about loving yourself enough to set boundaries, to demand respect, to walk away from situations that diminish your worth. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, it's about discovering that the people you thought were your enemies were just scared of losing something they loved. That there's room for everyone at the table, as long as everyone agrees to actually sit down and share the meal. Margaret and I will never be best friends. We'll probably never completely understand each other, but we've learned to coexist in the space around Adrian's heart. Two women who love him differently, but genuinely. Two women who have discovered that love shared is love multiplied. The morning after Margaret's first successful dinner at our house, I woke up to find Adrian making coffee in our kitchen, humming softly to himself. He looked lighter somehow, like a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. When he saw me, he smiled in a way that reminded me of the confident man I'd fallen in love with 8 years ago. "Thank you," he said, handing me my favorite mug filled with perfectly brewed coffee. "For what?" "For fighting for us by refusing to fight. For loving me enough to let me go. For trusting me enough to let me come back." I stood there in my beautiful kitchen, in the home we'd built together, surrounded by the life we'd chosen to create, and felt something I hadn't felt in months. Peace. Not the fragile peace of avoiding conflict, but the deep, sustainable peace of knowing that love, real love, can survive almost anything. Even your mother-in-law, the next time Margaret accused me of stealing her son, I was ready with my response. I didn't steal him. I loved him enough to give him back. And he chose to return to me. That's not theft. That's choice. And for the first time in 7 years, Margaret had nothing to say. Have you ever been betrayed by the people closest to you? Share your story in the comments. Someone out there needs to hear it. Because sometimes the bravest thing you can do is love someone enough to let them go, trusting that real love will always find its way back home. But that's not where this story ends. The real transformation began in the weeks that followed, when I discovered that my calculated risk had done more than just save my marriage. It had fundamentally changed the way I saw myself and my place in the world. The morning after Margaret's first successful dinner at our house, I woke up before dawn with an idea that would reshape everything. I'd been lying in bed, listening to Adrian's steady breathing, thinking about the conversation I'd overheard Margaret having with her sister the night before. "I was wrong about her," Margaret had said, her voice carrying through the thin walls of our guest bathroom. "She's not what I thought she was. She's stronger than I gave her credit for, smarter too. The way she handled this whole situation, I've never seen anything like it." "What do you mean?" her sister had asked. "She outmaneuvered me completely, made me look like the villain in my own story. But the thing is, she did it with such grace, such dignity. She never fought dirty, never tried to turn Adrian against me. She just stepped back and let me hang myself with my own rope." There was a pause, and then Margaret continued. "I spent months planning ways to break them up, and she defeated me by agreeing with me. She gave me exactly what I said I wanted, and it made me realize I didn't actually want it at all." Lying there in the pre-dawn darkness, I felt something shift inside me. For months, I'd been operating from a place of defense, constantly trying to prove my worth, justify my presence, validate my right to exist in Adrian's life, but Margaret's words made me realize that I'd been approaching the problem all wrong. I wasn't too little for this family. I was too much, too confident, too self-possessed, too comfortable with my own power. Margaret hadn't been threatened by my weaknesses. She'd been threatened by my strengths. That realization changed everything. I got up quietly, careful not to wake Adrian, and went to my home office. I pulled out the business plan I'd been working on sporadically for months, the one I'd always told myself I'd get to someday. Revenge treats had started as a joke, a play on words about sweet comebacks and bitter endings. But looking at it now, I saw something else entirely. I saw a business built on the idea that the best revenge is living well, that the most powerful response to people who try to diminish you is to expand beyond their ability to contain you. That's sometimes the most devastating thing you can do to someone who wants to see you fail, is to succeed so spectacularly that their opinion becomes irrelevant. I spent the next 6 hours completely rewriting the business plan. Instead of a simple design service, Revenge Treats became something more ambitious. A comprehensive lifestyle brand focused on helping people reclaim their power after betrayal, disappointment, and emotional manipulation. The core service would still be interior design, but with a specific focus on helping clients create spaces that reflected their authentic selves, rather than what others expected them to be. I'd also offer personal styling consultations, confidence coaching, and what I called power positioning. Sessions helping people learn to present themselves in ways that commanded respect and shut down passive-aggressive behavior. But the real innovation was the community aspect. I envisioned online forums where people could share their stories, support each other through difficult family dynamics, and celebrate their victories, both large and small. I wanted to create a space where people like me, people who had been made to feel like they were too much or not enough, could find their tribe. By the time Adrian woke up, I had a complete business plan, a preliminary website mock-up, and a 3-month launch timeline. I also had something I hadn't felt in years. Absolute certainty about my own worth and my own vision. "What are you doing up so early?" Adrian asked, finding me in the kitchen with my laptop and a stack of notebooks. "Building an empire," I said, and meant it. He laughed, thinking I was joking, but when he saw the intensity in my eyes, his expression grew serious. "What kind of empire?" I walked him through the business plan, watching his face change as he realized the scope of what I was proposing. This wasn't a hobby or a side project. This was a full-scale entrepreneurial venture that would position me as an expert in the exact areas where I'd been made to feel inadequate. "This is incredible," he said when I finished. "But Maya, this is huge. Are you sure you're ready for something this ambitious?" "I'm sure. I've been thinking small for too long, trying to make myself palatable to people who were never going to accept me anyway. I'm done with that." "What about Mum?" "She's finally starting to come around. Your mother's opinion of me is no longer relevant to my decision-making process. She can come along for the ride or not, but I'm not going to limit myself based on what she might think." Adrian stared at me for a long moment, and I saw something in his eyes that I recognized from our early dating days. Admiration mixed with a little bit of awe. "You're different," he said finally. "I'm the same person I've always been. I'm just done pretending to be smaller than I am." The launch of Revenge Treats exceeded every expectation I'd had. Within 3 months, I had a waiting list of clients stretching 6 months out. The online community grew from a few dozen members to over 10,000. I was featured in 3 major magazines and invited to speak at a conference about entrepreneurship and personal empowerment. But the real measure of success wasn't in the numbers. It was in the transformations I witnessed every day. Women who had been told they were too aggressive learned to channel that energy into leadership. People who had been dismissed as too sensitive discovered that their emotional intelligence was actually a superpower. Individuals who had been made to feel like they didn't belong anywhere found their tribes and built their own kingdoms. My favorite client was a woman named Sarah, whose mother-in-law had spent 15 years criticizing everything from her cooking to her parenting to her career choices. When Sarah first contacted me, she was considering giving up her job as a nurse practitioner to become a full-time homemaker, thinking it might finally earn her mother-in-law's approval. Instead, we redesigned her home office to reflect her professional achievements. We created a gallery wall featuring her nursing awards, photos from medical missions she'd participated in, and thank you letters from patients. We chose furniture that was both beautiful and functional, colors that energized rather than soothed, and accessories that spoke to her personality rather than her mother-in-law's preferences. The transformation was remarkable. Sarah's mother-in-law visited a week after the redesign and, for the first time in 15 years, had nothing critical to say. She spent the entire visit asking questions about Sarah's work, genuinely interested in hearing about her daughter-in-law's expertise and accomplishments. "She sees me differently now," Sarah told me during our follow-up call. "But more importantly, I see myself differently. I'm not trying to earn her approval anymore. I'm just being myself. And it turns out that's enough." That was the real power of revenge treats. Not just changing spaces, but changing the way people inhabited those spaces. Not just organizing closets, but organizing lives. Not just decorating rooms, but decorating lives with confidence, authenticity, and unapologetic self-expression. Margaret's reaction to my business success was perhaps the most surprising part of the entire experience. Instead of feeling threatened or competitive, she seemed genuinely impressed. She started referring friends to me, sharing my social media posts, and even asked if I would help her redesign her own living room. "I want something that reflects who I am now," she told me during our consultation. "Not who I was when I was married to Adrian's father." It was a profound statement from a woman who had spent years trying to preserve the past exactly as it was. Working with Margaret on her redesign gave me insights into her character that I'd never had before. She wasn't just a controlling mother-in-law, she was a widow who had lost her identity when her husband died. A woman who had clung to her role as Adrian's primary female influence because she didn't know who she was without it. The room we created for her was elegant but comfortable, sophisticated but not intimidating. We incorporated family photos, but arranged them in a way that celebrated the present as much as the past. We chose colors that reflected her personality deeper, richer tones than she'd ever allowed herself before. When the project was finished, Margaret stood in her transformed living room with tears in her eyes. "I feel like myself again," she said. "Like the woman I was before I became so afraid of losing everything." "You're not losing anything," I told her. "You're gaining a daughter-in-law who respects you, a son who's happier than he's ever been, and a future that has room for everyone." She hugged me then, the first genuine embrace we'd ever shared. "Thank you," she whispered. "Not just for the room, but for teaching me that love doesn't have to be a zero-sum game." 6 months after launching Revenge Treats, I was invited to speak at a conference about family dynamics and personal empowerment. The audience was primarily women, many of whom had stories similar to mine, stories of feeling diminished by family members, of being made to feel like they had to choose between their own happiness and family harmony. "The thing about revenge," I told the audience, "is that most people think it's about punishment, but the most powerful revenge is transformation. It's about becoming so completely yourself that the people who try to diminish you have no choice but to see you clearly." I shared my story there. Phone calls with Margaret, the decision to send Adrian away, the business I built from my own experience of being underestimated. I talked about the difference between fighting for your place at the table and building your own table. I discussed the power of stepping back, of giving people exactly what they think they want, of trusting that the truth has its own gravitational pull. "My mother-in-law accused me of stealing her son," I said. "So I gave him back, and in doing so, I discovered something crucial. You can't steal someone who chooses to be with you. You can only steal someone who doesn't want to be there in the first place." The response was overwhelming. Women lined up afterward to share their own stories, to ask for advice, to connect with each other. Many of them became clients, but more importantly, they became part of a growing community of people who had decided to stop apologizing for existing. One woman told me she'd been struggling with her husband's ex-wife, who constantly criticized her parenting of their blended family. Another had been dealing with a sister-in-law who made passive-aggressive comments about her weight at every family gathering. A third had been made to feel unwelcome at her own workplace by a clique of colleagues who resented her promotion. Each story was different, but the underlying theme was the same. People who had been made to feel like they were too much or not enough, who had been forced into defensive positions by others' insecurities and fears. People who needed permission to stop shrinking themselves to fit into spaces that were never designed for them. Stop trying to prove you belong, I told them. Start building spaces where you do belong. Stop asking for permission to be yourself. Start being yourself so completely that permission becomes irrelevant. The conference was a turning point for revenge treats. Within a month, I had speaking engagements booked 6 months out. The online community grew to over 50,000 members. I was approached by a publisher about writing a book, by a production company about developing a television show, by investors about franchising the business model. But the real transformation was internal. I'd started this journey feeling like I needed to prove my worth to Margaret, to Adrian, to anyone who questioned my place in the family. I'd ended it realizing that my worth was never actually in question. I'd just been asking the wrong people for validation. The woman who sent her husband away to prove her love was operating from a place of fear and insecurity. The woman who built a business empire from that experience was operating from a place of power and purpose. They were the same person, but the perspective had shifted completely. Adrian noticed the change immediately. "You walk differently now," he told me one evening as we sat on our porch, watching the sunset over the vineyard. "Like you own the ground you're standing on." "I do. Own the ground I'm standing on. We bought this house together, remember?" He laughed. "That's not what I mean, and you know it. You carry yourself like someone who knows her own worth, like someone who's not afraid of taking up space." "I'm not afraid of taking up space anymore. I'm not afraid of being too much for people who want me to be less." "Were you ever too much for me?" I considered the question seriously. "No, but I was afraid I might be, and that fear made me smaller. I was so worried about losing you that I forgot who I was without you. And now? Now I know who I am with you and without you. I love you, Adrian. I choose you every day, but I don't need you to complete me, or validate me, or make me feel worthy of love. I'm all of those things on my own." "That's the sexiest thing you've ever said to me." We both laughed, but there was truth in his words. The confidence I'd gained through building revenge treats had transformed every aspect of my life, including my marriage. I was more present, more passionate, more willing to take risks and be vulnerable. I was also more willing to set boundaries, to say no to things that didn't serve me, to prioritize my own needs alongside Adrian's. The irony wasn't lost on me that Margaret's attempt to make me feel insecure had ultimately made me more secure than I'd ever been. Her accusations of theft had led me to discover what I was actually capable of building. Her attempts to diminish me had inspired me to expand beyond her wildest imagination. A year after launching Revenge Treats, I received an unexpected email from one of Margaret's friends, a woman who had been present for many of the conversations where Margaret had criticized me. She was writing to apologize for her silence during those times and to ask if I would consider taking her on as a client. "I watched what you did," she wrote. "How you handled Margaret's attacks with such grace and dignity. How you turn her attempts to hurt you into something beautiful and powerful. I've been dealing with my own family drama for years, and I'm ready to stop being a victim and start being a survivor." Her email reminded me that our struggles are rarely just about us. They're about the example we set for others, the permission we give people to fight back, to stand up, to refuse to be diminished by others' fears and insecurities. Margaret and I had coffee that afternoon, something that had become a regular occurrence. She was telling me about her book club, about the volunteer work she'd started doing at the local hospital, About the art classes she'd begun taking. I've been thinking about what you said, she told me. About love not being a zero-sum game. I think I spent so many years afraid of losing Adrian that I forgot to enjoy having him. Fear has a way of creating the very thing we're afraid of, I said. When we try to control love, we usually end up pushing it away. Is that what I was doing? Trying to control love? You were trying to control loss, but you can't control loss by controlling love. You can only control loss by loving so fully and authentically that whatever time you have is meaningful. Margaret was quiet for a long moment. I'm proud of you, she said finally. Not just for the business, but for the woman you've become. For the way you've handled all of this. I put you through hell, and you responded with heaven. I responded with truth. That's all any of us can do. The truth is, I was never really afraid you'd stolen Adrian. I was afraid you'd earned something I'd never earned. What's that? His respect, his admiration, his desire to be better for you. I loved him with all my heart, but I never challenged him to grow the way you do. I never made him want to be more than he was. It was perhaps the most honest thing Margaret had ever said to me, and it helped me understand something I'd never fully grasped. Her initial hostility hadn't been about me at all. It had been about her own insecurities, her own fear that she wasn't enough, her own struggle to find her place in Adrian's evolving life. You didn't lose anything when Adrian married me, I told her. You gained a daughter-in-law who sees how much you love him, who respects the job you did raising him, who wants to build a family that includes you. I know that now, but it took me a long time to get here. Growth takes time, change takes time, forgiveness takes time. But we have time, Margaret, we have the rest of our lives to figure out how to be a family. As I drove home that evening, I thought about the woman I'd been 2 years ago, anxious, defensive, constantly trying to prove herself worthy of love and acceptance. I thought about the woman I was now, confident, purposeful, surrounded by a thriving business and a community of people who had found their own power through my example. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. It had been built through thousands of small choices. The choice to stop apologizing for my existence. The choice to trust my own instincts. The choice to respond to attacks with grace rather than retaliation. The choice to build something beautiful from the ashes of someone else's destructive behavior. But the most important choice had been the decision to love myself enough to walk away from situations that diminished me. To trust that real love, the kind worth having, would follow me into spaces where I could be fully myself. That night, Adrian and I sat in our redesigned living room, surrounded by the life we'd built together, the business I'd created, the family we'd fought to preserve and transform. On the coffee table was a contract for my book deal, a speaking engagement confirmation, and a thank you card from a client whose life had been changed by our work together. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't sent me away? Adrian asked. I considered the question. I think we would have survived. We loved each other enough to weather almost anything. But I don't think we would have thrived the way we have. I don't think I would have discovered what I was capable of. And my mother? Your mother would have continued to see me as a threat instead of an ally. She would have spent the rest of her life fighting a war that didn't need to be fought. So you're saying the best thing that ever happened to our marriage was my mother trying to destroy it? I'm saying the best thing that ever happened to our marriage was me learning to trust it enough to risk it. We sat in comfortable silence, both of us probably thinking about the journey that had brought us to this moment. The accusations, the manipulations, the phone calls and suitcases and difficult conversations. The slow, painful process of learning to love each other without losing ourselves. The discovery that the strongest marriages are built not on need but on choice. Not on desperation but on confidence. Not on fear but on trust. The next morning, I woke up to find an email from a woman in Australia who had heard about revenge treats through social media. She was dealing with her own mother-in-law situation. her own feelings of inadequacy and displacement. She wanted to know if I offered virtual consultations, if there was any way I could help her transform her situation the way I'd transformed mine. I smiled as I typed my response, thinking about the ripple effects of choosing courage over comfort, growth over safety, authenticity over acceptance. Every person who found their power through my example would go on to inspire others. Every woman who stopped apologizing for existing would give other women permission to do the same. That was the real revenge, not the destruction of my enemies, but the multiplication of my allies. Not the defeat of those who had tried to diminish me, but the elevation of those who had been diminished by others. Not the punishment of people who had hurt me, but the healing of people who had been hurt in similar ways. Margaret still comes to dinner every month. She still occasionally makes comments that reveal her old patterns of thinking. But now, instead of triggering my insecurities, her words simply bounce off the armor of self-knowledge I've built. I don't need her approval anymore, so I'm free to enjoy her company. I don't need her validation, so I'm free to offer her mine. The woman who once accused me of stealing her son now brags about me to her friends. The woman who once saw me as a threat now sees me as a teacher. The woman who once tried to make me feel small now tells everyone about my big dreams and bigger accomplishments. That's the thing about revenge. When you do it right, everyone wins. When you respond to cruelty with grace, to diminishment with expansion, to hate with love, you don't just change yourself. You change the entire dynamic. You transform enemies into allies, conflicts into opportunities, endings into beginnings, and sometimes, if you're very lucky, you discover that the people you thought were trying to destroy you were actually trying to save themselves, that the attacks you survived were really cries for help, that the battles you won were really invitations to a deeper understanding of what it means to be human, to be flawed, to be afraid, and to be capable of growth. 2 years after Margaret first accused me of stealing her son, she gave me a gift that brought tears to my eyes. A framed photo of Adrian and me from our wedding day with an inscription that read, "To the daughter I never had but always needed. Thank you for loving my son the way he deserves to be loved, and for teaching me that family is not about blood or history, but about choice and grace." Below that, in smaller text, she had written, "P.S. You didn't steal him, you helped him find himself, and in doing so, you helped me find myself too." I keep that photo on my desk now, next to my computer where I write emails to clients and develop new programs for revenge treats. It reminds me every day that the most powerful revenge is not destruction, but transformation, not division, but healing, not endings but beginnings. And sometimes, when I'm feeling particularly grateful for the journey that brought me here, I think about that woman who once felt so small, so defensive, so desperate to prove her worth to people who had already decided she wasn't valuable. I think about how she turned her greatest humiliation into her greatest triumph, her deepest wound into her strongest asset, her most painful ending into her most beautiful beginning. That woman was me. That woman is me. That woman is every person who has ever been told they're too much or not enough, who has ever been made to feel like they don't belong, who has ever been forced to choose between their own happiness and someone else's approval. And to all of those people, I want to say this: you are not too much. You are not enough. You belong wherever you choose to plant your feet and grow your dreams. And the most powerful revenge you can take against anyone who tries to diminish you is to expand so completely, so authentically, so unapologetically that their opinion becomes irrelevant. Build your own table, create your own kingdom, write your own story, and when someone accuses you of stealing what was never theirs to give, hand it back with grace and build something better, because that's not theft. That's transformation. That's not endings, that's beginnings. That's not revenge, that's revolution.